as a lot of our listeners will know, there are three phases of developing a drug. You have your phase 1 trials, phase 2, and phase 3. Todd, do you want to give us a quick rundown of what the difference in those phases are?
Absolutely. So you've got the three phases. Most drugs Fumab will have to go through all three of these phases. There's an exception. We'll get to that in a minute. Phase 1 is more to figure out the dosing. Okay, we've got this great idea in preclinical studies. Now let's figure out with a small trial in humans what the safe dose is that we can give to people. So that's phase 1. Phase 2, you're now saying, okay, I've got the dose. Now let's make sure that it's safe. And by the way, we'll also look to see if it works as a secondary endpoint. But that's phase 2. And then phase 3 is, okay, phase 2 showed that there's some efficacy. It showed that it's safe. Let's roll it out to a heck of a lot of people and make sure that this drug is as good as we think it is based on our phase 1 and phase 2 studies.
One company that I want to highlight here is a company that manages all the paperwork involved, because as you can imagine, this is a really complicated process. You have to keep track of everything. There's a lot of information being created that needs to be stored. And so the company is Veeva Systems. And you might be familiar with them because of their CRM, Life Sciences IT for sales and marketing. But they also have this Veeva Vault part of the business that does exactly this, keeps track of all the R&D information.
Right, and Veeva is an interesting stock because not only can you participate in the development stage, but Veeva also participates in the commercial stage, which we'll get to in a minute. Another stock that might be intriguing to investors to check out is Quintiles. And the reason that Quintiles is interesting, the symbol there is Q, is that they help run all of these clinical trials. So they're going to be working with the Bristol Myers of the world, if you will, in figuring out, okay, where are we going to recruit patients? How are we going to manage all of those patients? How are we going to manage that data? So that's another company in the development stage that might be worth checking out.
And they're known as a CRO, which is a contract research organization. And I believe they actually have an agreement to merge with IMS Health. Is that right?
Right. And in that case, they're going to also move a little bit into the commercial stage as well. That deal could be a pretty important one. This is a stock I'm watching. I don't currently own it, but I'm very intrigued by it. So I want to see how that integration goes with that merger. And if that goes well, this might end up in at least this fool's portfolio. Overall, I mean, you and I on the show, we talk a tremendous amount about clinical stage companies. And usually it's phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 drugs. Investors should probably remember that whenever we're talking about those kind of drugs, phase 1 is highly risky. Phase 2 is a little less risky, but still pretty risky. And phase 3 is also risky. I mean, you look at historical failure rates in clinical trials, and in cancer alone, 50% of phase 3 trials still fall short. So if you're looking for investment ideas that don't have the risk of trial failure, then Veeva and Quintiles are two that you might want to keep in mind.
Another one that I would consider very low risk is actually a healthcare REIT, which is a real estate type company, and they're HCP. So they have over 1,000 different properties in senior housing, post-acute care, life science, and medical office buildings. So a good chunk of that is going to be the actual place where you're doing this discovery and development work. And we're familiar with the demographic trends here, and we know that more and more drugs are being created every day because people are living longer, and so they need more drugs. And so HCP stands to capitalize on that.
Well, what's nice about HCP, too, is that, the facilities that all this drug research and everything is occurring in, they're complex facilities, right? You can't just go down the street and rent from another person. They're building these out for clients who have very specific needs. And as a result, they don't have a whole heck of a lot of churn in their leases.
Yeah, another point to add to that is once you get approval for your drug, you can't change it. So if you have a specific process in place, you're going to keep using that process.
Exactly. And we're going to get down to another idea shortly. I don't want to jump too far ahead, but that talks about, the process, the bioprocess of creating biologic drugs that people can invest in. But I suppose we could jump to approval if you're all right with that now with Fumab.
Let's keep with what you just mentioned about bioprocessing right before we move on. So I believe you were referring there to Repligen, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's the stock I was sort of hinting at. This is a company that basically makes proteins and things that are needed for the biotechnology company to create their biologic medicine, right? Biologic drugs are complex. They're made in living organisms. And because of that complexity, Repligen has carved out a very intriguing niche, supplying them with vital tools that they need to create these drugs. They're not a huge company. They've only got about 100 million in annualized sales, but they are growing by double digits.
Since we are talking about full MAB, I want to point out why exactly we're using MAB there. A lot of drug names will end in these three letters, MAB. It stands for monoclonal antibody. And Repligen, so much of their revenue is tied to the development of these monoclonal antibodies, which is the fastest growing segment of the biologics market. I mean, these are drugs like Humira and Soliris, a really, really important niche of biotechnology.
And a significant number of the drugs that are in clinical trials right now and making their way through are biologics. So theoretically, with thousands of more drugs in development than were, say, 10 years ago, their tailwind should be pretty good for this company.